Good day, everyone. So we're going to discuss principles of disease and epidemiology. So now that you have a basic understanding of the structures and function of microorganisms and some idea of the variety of microorganisms that exist, so now we consider how the human body and various microorganisms interact in terms of health and disease. So this chapter mainly discussed the general principle of disease, starting with a discussion of the meaning and scope of pathology. So pathology is the scientific study of disease. So pathos means suffering, logos means science. So also pathology is first concerned with the cause or etiology of disease. And next, it deals also with the pathogenesis, so the way a disease develops. And lastly, pathology is concerned with the structural and functional changes brought about by disease and their effects on the body. So by definition with the infection, because it's also related with how disease is manifested. So disease, rather the terms of infection and disease are sometimes used interchangeably. They differ somewhat in meaning. So disease is an abnormal state in which part or all the body is incapable of performing its normal functions. And by the infection may exist in the absence of detectable diseases. So moving on, in the human microbiome, so the Human Microbiome Project began in 2007 to analyze microbial communities called microbiomes that live in and on the human body. So its goal is to determine the relationship between changes in the human microbiome and human health and disease. So the human microbiome is more diverse than previously thought. So here's a figure 14.1, shows the representative normal microbiota for different regions of the body. So it means that the presence of the bacteria are in normal range. So it doesn't cause any certain diseases. So here, letter A shows surface of nasal epithelium. Letter B shows the lining of the stomach, and C shows the small intestine. So many factors determine the distribution and composition of the normal microbiota. So among these are nutrients, physical and chemical factors, and the host defenses. Its mechanical factors. So the microbes vary with respect to the types of nutrients they can use as an energy source. So here, as you can see, same figure 14.1, show the microorganism that establish permanent residence or colonize but do not produce disease under normal conditions are a member of the body's normal microbiota. So accordingly, these microbes can colonize only those body sites that can supply the appropriate nutrients that they need. So these nutrients may be derived from dead cells, food in the gastrointestinal tract, secretory and excretory products of cells, and substances in body fluids. Also, aside from a normal microbiota, napunta gitawag nga transient microbiota. So this means that by definition, these microorganisms are only temporarily found in the human body, and this may include pathogenic microorganisms. Moving on, here is a table 14.1 showing the representative normal microbiota by body region. So I hope you will familiarize this one. So basic regions lang ang hatag diri: the skin, the eyes, nose and throat, mouth, large intestine, and urinary and reproductive systems. So basically, principal components or the microorganisms that are present. For example, sa skin, naatay Staphylococcus, Corneobacterium, Candida, and Melasthesia. So basically, skin is mostly microbes do their contact with skin and don't become residents because the secretions from sweat and oil glands have antimicrobial properties. And the skin has a relatively low moisture content. And also, for example, urinary and reproductive system. here, the following microorganisms: Staphylococcus, Enterococcus, Lactobacillus, Bacteroides, so on and so forth. So it mentions that the lower urethra in both sexes has a resident population, so na normal microbiome ana. And the vagina has an acid-tolerant population of microbes because of the nature of its secretion. So, ang makasurvive lang within the given pH ang makastay gid sa organ, and di siya basta-basta sab matawagan na kanang mastehan og kanang foreign microorganisms. Moving on to relationships between the normal microbiota and the host. So once established, the normal microbiota can benefit host by preventing the overgrowth of harmful microorganisms. So this is called microbial antagonism or competitive exclusion. So microbial antagonism, by definition, it involves competition among microbes. So through microbial antagonism, the normal bacterial flora of the body provides some defense against disease-causing organisms. So an example of that is, an example of microbial antagonism is in the large intestine, wherein E. coli cells produce bacteriocins. So these proteins inhibits the growth of other bacteria of the same or closely related species of E. coli, such as pathogenic Salmonella and Shigella. Normal microbiota and the host illustrate symbiosis because this relationship between two organisms in which at least one organism is dependent on each other. So here makita nato ang symbiosis. So this nasa commensalism as well, mutualism, and parasitism. Many of the microorganisms, such as kanang sa letter A, commensalism, they make up the normal microbiota or the commensal. So this includes the Staphylococcus epidermidis. These are bacteria that inhibit the surface of the skin. Parasitism, here is only one organism benefits at the expense of the other. So here, influenza virus on a host cell. So it would, so this would lead to infection or disease, a certain type of disease. So moving on, this is just an example of opportunistic pathogens. So opportunistic pathogens, by definition, is a group of microorganisms that do not usually infect healthy hosts but produce infections in hospitals to immunodepressed persons or those patients presenting underlying diseases, which favors infection. So here, makita natin this is Candida albicans. Letter B, Staphylococcus aureus. Letter C is Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Letter D is Clostridium difficile. And letter E, Legionella pneumophila. And last is Haemophilus influenza pneumoniae. So, as you all know, that Candida albicans in letter A can lead to candidiasis. So this infection is caused by the fungus Candida albicans. So its normal flora is in the oral cavity as well as the genital organs in humans. However, it may cause infection if the host immunity is low. Next is staph infection, which is by Staphylococcus aureus, which is shown in letter B. This bacterial agent covers the skin of humans but may cause opportunistic staph infections when present in internal devices such as prosthetic joints or intravenous lines. So this sort of staph infection may lead to severe sepsis. Next is last is Pseudomonas aeruginosa, which is shown in letter C. So this bacterial species colonizes medical devices such as catheters. So this the most common cause of external ear infections, burn infections, and respiratory infections is associated with the hospital infections. So we're moving on to the etiology of infectious diseases or the cause or origin of the disease. So some disease such as polio, Lyme disease, and tuberculosis have a well-known etiology. And also infectious diseases are disorders caused by organisms such as bacteria, viruses, fungi, or parasites. And many organisms live in and or a body. So they are normally harmless or even helpful, but under certain conditions, some organisms may cause disease. So here, based on the etiology of infectious disease, they propose Koch postulates. So as you can see, by numbered na iyahang sequence. So according to Koch postulates daw that a specific infection disease is caused by a specific microbe. So ang nahitabo diri, this postulate is to help determine the cause of the disease by first step in prevention and treatment. So this helps the microbiologist identify the cause of emerging diseases. So as you can see, number one, so ang gibuhat diri gi-isolate ang tawag ana a microorganism from a dead animal, and then they create a pure culture and gihulat nilang mag-grow a microorganism, and then once grown, they they inoculate a colony, and then ilading tawag na inject it to a healthy laboratory animal. And then here makita nato nga the disease is reproduced again in a laboratory animal, and then ang blood sample ani is taken again, and then culture na pod in pure culture, and then examine again what type of microorganism develops disease, and also same here, so which means it confirms na same ang cause sa tawag na disease sa both rats. So that is summarized as follows. So mo ni siyang gitawag nga same pathogen must be present in every case of the disease. Next is pathogen must be isolated from the disease host and grown in pure culture. And then the pathogen from the pure culture must cause disease when it's inoculated into a healthy, susceptible laboratory animal. And then last is the pathogen must be isolated from the inoculated animal and must be shown to the original organism. So this helps confirm tawagan ni and to confirm and identify the microorganism that cause the said disease. So basically, there are also exceptions to Koch postulates. However, for example, several microorganisms currently cannot be grown in laboratory cultures. This includes agent of syphilis, Treponema pallidum, and multiple viruses such as hepatitis B virus. So we're done with the etiology of infectious disease. So let's move on to classifying infectious disease. So every disease that affects the body alters body structures and functions in particular ways, and these alterations are usually indicated by several kinds of evidence. So we do have communicable disease and non-communicable disease. So communicable disease, by definition, these are the disease is infected person transmits an infectious agent either directly or indirectly to another person who in turn becomes infected. So example niya is chickenpox, measles, influenza, genital herpes, tuberculosis. So moreover that chickenpox and measles are also the examples of a contagious disease because these diseases are very communicable and capable of spreading easily and rapidly one person to another. So let's move on to non-communicable disease. So this type is the disease that is not spread from one host to another. So these diseases are caused by microorganisms that normally inhabit the body and only occasionally produce disease, or by microorganisms that reside outside the body and produce disease only when introduced in the body. So for example, ani is an example in tetanus, Clostridium tetani. So they produce disease only when it is introduced into the body via abrasions or wounds. So there are two key differences. So communicable disease, usually an infectious disease, while non-communicable is not non-infectious disease. And then next is communicable disease, such can spread from one person to another via different types of methods, while non-communicable disease is a group of chronic, slow-progressing disease. So one example, some examples of non-communicable disease, which is a slow-progressing disease, could include heart disease, stroke, cancer, diabetes, and chronic lung disease, which is collectively they are responsible for almost 70% of all deaths worldwide. And then uncommunicable disease, HIV, hepatitis A, B, and C, measles, salmonella, and bloodborne illnesses. So the most common form, type of communicable disease could spread in terms of fecal oral, food, sexual intercourse, insect bites, droplets, or skin contact. So we're done with the communicable and non-communicable diseases. So let's move to the occurrence of the disease. So to understand the full scope of a disease, we should know something a bit about its occurrence. So there are two, which is incidence and prevalence. So the incidence, by definition, is a disease, the number of people in a population who develop a disease in a particular time period. So this is an indicator of the spread of disease. While prevalence of a disease, number of people in a population who develop a disease at a specified time, regardless of when it was first spread. So prevalence takes into account both old and new cases. So it's an indicator of how seriously and how long a disease affects a population. So to explain more about incidence and prevalence, I will show a video which explains thoroughly the difference between the incidence of a disease and prevalence of disease.
Hey everyone, this video is about incidence and prevalence. It's absolutely crucial to understand what incidence and prevalence are and what the difference between the two is. Incidence is a measure of disease risk, whereas prevalence measures disease burden. Incidence is defined as the number of new cases of a disease during a specific time period divided by the number of persons at risk for the disease during that same time period. The resulting proportion can be multiplied by 1,000 in order to get the number of new cases per 1,000 population, or by 100 in order to get the number of new cases per 100 population. That's up to the beholder. Let's take the example of a fictitious population of 10 women free from disease. 4 of these women developed uterine cancer during a given year. So the incidence is 4 divided by 10 times 1,000, equaling an incidence rate of 400 cases per 1,000 population per year. What's critical for incidence is that every person in the denominator must have the potential to become one of the people in the numerator. In fact, these 4 people are part of the denominator. They transitioned from disease-free to diseased. Incidence is a measure of events and therefore a measure of risk. So we said that everyone in the denominator must have the potential to become a member of the numerator or the disease group. Let's come back to our study of uterine cancer. If 3 women of our fictitious population had their uteruses removed, if they had undergone hysterectomy, in other words, they would no longer have the potential to become part of the numerator. So instead of 4 divided by 10, it would now be 4 divided by 7 times 1,000 equals a new fictitious incidence rate of 570 per 1,000. Now, what about prevalence? Prevalence is defined as the number of affected persons in the population divided by the number of all persons in that population at a specific point in time. So in this fictitious example, it would be 3 divided by 10 times 1,000, which would mean that we have a prevalence of 300 per 1,000 population. And what's the difference between incidence and prevalence? Let's take a group of 5 people who develop tuberculosis over a period of 6 months. 1 develops the disease in January, 2 in February, 1 in April, and 1 in May. So ignoring the denominator for now, the incident cases in February, for example, would be 2. Or in other words, 2 would be the numerator of the incidence rate for that month. And it would be 1 for the months of January, April, and May. Now, prevalence also takes into account the duration of the disease. Let's say case number 1 is cured in May, case number 2 is cured in April, case number 3 in March, case 4 and 5 during the second half of the year. Now let's look at the prevalence of tuberculosis in these months. Let's also just focus on the numerator or the prevalent cases during each month. We have 1 case in January, 3 cases in February, 3 in March, 3 in April, 3 in May, and 2 in June. So prevalence is determined by how many people join the prevalence pool or the incidence, and how many leave the prevalence pool through death or cure. Let us depict that with a vessel full of pebbles. The vessel is filled with pebbles or new cases by the incidence rate, and it's emptied by death or cure. This means that if death goes up, then more people will leave the vessel, and if death goes down, then more people will stay in the vessel. And the same thing applies for cure. If more people are cured, more pebbles or people will leave the vessel, and if cure rate goes down, then more pebbles or people will stay in the vessel. Let's have a closer look. Let's say this is our baseline prevalence. Now, what happens to prevalence if incidence goes up? While death and cure stay the same, it has to go up, right? What happens if incidence stays the same, but death goes down, while cure rate stays the same? It will go up since fewer pebbles will leave the vessel. What if death goes down and cure rate goes up? Well, as you probably guessed correctly, prevalence will decrease since more pebbles will leave the vessel. So prevalence is a measure of disease burden. As such, it is a great tool for planning the allocation of health services. So prevalence is incidence times duration, and duration is determined by the death rate or the cure rate. If the death rate or the cure rate go up, then the disease duration will be shortened. If death rate and cure rate go down, disease duration will be prolonged. At most points in time, prevalence will be lower with shorter duration and higher with longer duration of disease. Now let's use another fictitious example to clarify this point. Let's use an example of coronary heart disease in 2 different populations. One is the population of Hollywood. The other one is the population of the Bronx. Our fictitious Hollywood has a prevalence of 50 cases per 1,000 population. The Bronx, on the other hand, has a prevalence of 10 per 1,000. So to the person who's not familiar with the fact that prevalence is not a measure of risk, but rather a measure of the burden of the disease, it looks like folks from Hollywood are at an increased risk of CHD. But that conclusion is not true at all here. Let's look at the incidence rates, duration of disease in both locations. Incidence is 5 per 1,000 per year in both locations. But duration of disease is 10 years in Hollywood due to better care, whereas in the Bronx, people die from CHD after 2 years. So in fact, the higher prevalence in Hollywood is just an expression of better care of an incurable disease. You see, we said prevalence is equal to incidence times duration. So 5 times 10 is 50, and 5 times 2 is 10. So I hope the difference between incidence and prevalence is now crystal clear. Now, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below.
So that's it for both prevalence and incidence. So let's go back. So we will discuss more about the different types of diseases. So here, the frequency of occurrence is another criterion that is used in the classification of disease. So if particular disease occurs only occasionally, so it is called sporadic disease. Also, if a disease is constantly present in population, it is called an endemic disease. So an example of this is the common cold. So also, if many people are given an area acquire a certain disease in a relatively short period of time, so it is called an epidemic disease. So for example, Annie is influenza that often achieves epidemic status. So diseases that are only seen occasionally and usually without geographic concentrations are called sporadic. So an example, Annie, would be tetanus, rabies, and plague. For endemic, example, Annie, it would be chickenpox. And then examples for epidemic disease would be yellow fever, smallpox, measles, and polio are the prime example. And also an epidemic disease that occurs worldwide is called a pandemic disease. So a pandemic is a specific type of epidemic affecting various geographical locations. So there have been numerous outbreaks throughout time, so with the coronavirus disease being the most prevalent at this time. So let's move on to the severity or duration of the disease. So severity, by definition, is the degree of something undesirable or badness or seriousness, and then the duration is an amount of time or a particular time interval. So here, there are four: acute disease, chronic disease, subacute disease, and latent disease. So acute disease, by definition, it develops rapidly but lasts only a short time, which is an example is influenza. It could be asthma attack, broken bone, common cold. So these symptoms again for acute disease develops rapidly. And the next, chronic disease, this disease develops slowly. So the body reaction may be less severe, but the disease is likely to continue or recur for long periods of time, such as Alzheimer's disease, depression, and diabetes. And then subacute disease, the symptoms between acute and chronic. So this is an intermediate between both. So for example, Annie would be subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. Next is the latent disease. So this disease is with a period of no symptom, and the causative agent remains inactive for a time but becomes active to produce symptoms of the disease. So acute conditions or the acute disease are often caused by a virus or an infection. It could be caused by an injury resulting from a fall or an automobile accident or in the misuse of drugs or medication. And for chronic disease or a chronic condition, often caused by unhealthy behaviors that increase the risk of disease, poor nutrition, inadequate physical activity, overuse of alcohol, or smoking. So here, na-mention na itong example for subacute disease would be a subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. So this is a rare brain disease characterized by diminished intellectual function and loss of their function. For latent, this means that the causative agent is hidden, dormant, or inactive. So, for example, Annie is the virus that causes chickenpox remains latent after the initial attack of chickenpox is over, and when it becomes reactive again, or it would reactivate, usually many years later, the virus causes shingles. So here, the rate at which disease or an epidemic spreads and the number of individuals involved are determined in part by the immunity of the population. So here, vaccination can provide long-lasting and sometimes lifelong protection of an individual against certain diseases. So people are immune to an infectious disease may carry the pathogen but not have the disease, so thereby reducing the occurrence of the disease. So immune individuals act as a barrier to the spread of infectious agents and a great advantage of the vaccination. So it protects enough individuals in the population to prevent the disease's rapid spread. So to those population who aren't vaccinated yet. So even though a highly communicable disease may cause an epidemic, many non-immune people will be protected because of the unlikelihood of their coming into contact with an infected person. So here, that's why herd immunity is important. If most people and population are immune to a particular disease, this form of immunity is referred as the herd immunity. So by definition, it occurs when a large portion of the community becomes immune to a disease, making the spread of a disease from person to person unlikely, as shown in the figure. So when there is herd immunity, outbreaks are limited to sporadic cases because there are not enough susceptible individuals to support the spread of the disease to epidemic proportions. And susceptible individuals include children who are too young to be vaccinated or whose parents refuse to vaccinate them, and people with immune disorders and those who are too ill to be vaccinated. So here makita na to, no one is immunized, so the contagious disease spreads through the population. If some of the people gets immunized, still the contagious disease spread through some of the population. But if the most of the population gets immunized and have herd immunity, so the spread of contagious disease is contained. So let's move on sa extent sa host involvement. So infections can also be classified according to the extent to which the host body is affected. So here, infections can also be classified according. So here, a local, a systemic or generalized infection, and focal infection. So for local infection, these are the invading microorganisms that are limited to relatively small area of the body, for example, like boils or abscess. And next is systematic or generalized infection. So these microorganisms or their products are spread throughout the body by the blood or lymph. So there's an infection throughout the body, for example, in measles. And then last is focal infection. This is a localized or generalized infection that caused by the dissemination of microorganisms or toxic products from a focus of infection. So this focal infection is a systemic infection that began as a local infection. That's the different types of infection. So here also are the following terms of infection, such as sepsis. So sepsis is a toxic inflammatory condition arising from the spread of microbes. And septicemia is blood poisoning. So this is a systemic infection arising from the multiplication of pathogens in the blood. Bacteremia is bacteria in the blood. Toxemia, presence of toxins in the blood. Viremia as well, presence of viruses in the blood. And last is septicemia, is the growth of bacteria in the blood. So here we also have the state of host resistance, and which determines the extent of infections. So there are primary infection, secondary infection, and subclinical diseases. So primary infection, by definition, it's an acute infection that caused the initial illness. And next is secondary infection. This is an opportunistic infection after a primary or predisposed infection. So secondary infection could be from the skin and respiratory tract are common and are sometimes more dangerous than the primary infections. Next is subclinical disease, so no noticeable signs or symptoms. So dili makita. So inapparent infection is one that doesn't cause any noticeable illness or symptoms or signs. So an example is poliovirus or hepatitis A virus, which can be carried by people who never developed an illness. So moreover, there are factors that makes the body more susceptible to a disease and may alter the course of the disease. So this is the gender, genetic background, climate and weather, vaccination, and herd immunity. So when it comes to gender is sometimes a predisposing factor because, for example, females have a higher incidence of a urinary tract infections than males, whereas males have higher rates of pneumonia and meningitis. So other aspect as well as the genetic background. So they play a role, which is, for example, a sickle cell disease is a severe life-threatening form of anemia that occurs when the genes for the disease are inherited from both parents. And the next is climate and weather. So it has some effect on the incidence of infectious disease. So we're in temperate regions, the incidence of respiratory disease increases during the winter. And then the increase may be related to the fact that when people stay indoors, the closer contact with one another facilitate the spread of the respiratory pathogens. So next, vaccination herd immunity as a predisposing factor, since it decreases the spread of disease. And age, religious practices, and indicate nutrition, environment, and etc. So here, we dealt with the stage of diseases. So once a microorganism overcomes the defenses of the host, development of the disease follows a certain sequence that tends to be similar whether the disease is acute or chronic. So there are stages. So nadiri is incubation, prodromal, period of illness, period of decline, and period of convalescence. So incubation period is a interval between the initial infection and the first appearance of any signs of symptoms. So muna siyang incubation period. So in some diseases, incubation period is always the same. In others, is quite variable. So the time of incubation depends on the specific microorganisms involved. So depende gihapon na sa what type of a microorganism is possible cause of a disease. Its growth rate, the number of infecting microorganisms, and resistance of the host. So whether a disease can be transmitted during the incubation period depends on the specific pathogen. So next period is a prodromal period. So this is relatively short that follows the period of incubation in some diseases. So kanisha. So this would be often difficult to differentiate the common cold from the prodromal symptoms related to other diseases such as measles, chickenpox, or other infections. Next, period of illness, so that the disease is most severe. So the person exhibits overt signs and symptoms of disease, such as an opportunity for transmission. Such a source is called a reservoir of infection. So this reservoir may be human, animal, or non-living. So most severe signs and symptoms. And the next would be the period of decline. So this means that the signs and symptoms subside. So during the period of decline, the signs and symptoms subside, so the fever decreases, the feeling of malaise diminishes. And during this phase, it may take less than 24 hours to several days, so the patient is vulnerable to secondary infections. And last is period of convalescence. So this person regains strength and the body returns to its pre-disease state. So recovery has occurred. So that's the 5 stages of disease. Next is how the infection is spread. So reservoir of infection can either be living or an inanimate object, which provides pathogen with adequate conditions for survival and multiplication and an opportunity for transmission. So it could be human, animal, non-living. So for human reservoirs, the principal living reservoir of human diseases is the human body itself. So the people with signs and symptoms of a disease may transmit the disease, and in addition, some people can harbor pathogens and transmit them to others without exhibiting any signs of illness. And with regard to animal reservoir, it could be both wild and domestic animals, wherein a living reservoir of microorganism can cause human disease. So here, carriers are important living reservoirs of infection. So these carriers do play an important role for the spread of such diseases. Since they are carriers, so wala pa nila na manifest, so they do carry the said infection and they can spread it if dili bitaw makita diretso ang symptoms. So, for example, the disease would be hepatitis, gonorrhea, big dysentery, and streptococcal infections. And also another term, zoonosis. So this disease occur primarily in wild and domestic animals, which is primarily transmitted to humans. For example, rabies and Lyme diseases. So there are about 150 zoonoses are known. So they can be transmitted to humans via one of many routes. So direct contact with infected animals, direct contact with domestic pets, domestic pet waste such as cleaning a litter box or bird cage. It could be a contamination of food or water, and also by consuming infected animal products or by arthropod vectors such as insects and transmit pathogens. And next is from another type third type of reservoir, non-living. So non-living reservoirs are two major non-living reservoirs of infectious disease are soil and water. So soil harbor such pathogens as fungi which cause mycosis such as ringworm and systemic infections. So here, Clostridium botulinum is the bacterium that causes botulism, and C. tetani, that bacterium that causes tetanus. So because both species of Clostridia are part of the normal intestinal microbiota of horses and cattle, so the bacteria are found especially in soil where animal feces are used as fertilizer. Next is a water source. So if it is contaminated by feces of humans and other animals, so there are reservoir of several pathogens which is responsible for the gastrointestinal disease, which includes Vibrio chloride, which is causes cholera, Cryptosporidium, which is causes diarrhea, and Salmonella typhi, which cause typhoid fever. So other non-living reservoirs include foods that are improperly prepared or stored. So they may be sources of such diseases such as trichinosis and salmonellosis. Since we're done with the spread of infection, we're going to deal with the transmission of the disease. So the causative agents of disease can be transmitted from the reservoir of infection to a susceptible host by 3 principal routes. It could be contact, vehicle, and vectors. So for contact transmission, by definition, it's a spread of disease agent by direct contact, indirect contact, or droplet transmission. So here, direct transmission is also known as person-to-person transmission. So it's a direct transmission. It could be its common forms are touching, kissing, and sexual intercourse. So this is one way to spread AIDS, syphilis, and infectious mononucleosis. Next is congenital transmission. So this transmission of disease from mother to fetus or newborn at birth. So this occurs when a pathogen present in mother's blood is capable of crossing the placenta or through the direct contact with the pathogen in the mother's blood or vaginal secretion during delivery. So here in direct contact transmission, it occurs when an agent of disease is transmitted from its reservoir to a susceptible host by means of non-living object. So next is droplet transmission. So these microbes are spread in droplet or mucous droplets that travel only short distances. So this could be coughing, sneezing, or laughing, or talking and travel less than 1 meter from the reservoir of their host. Also, fumite, by definition, it's a general term of non-living object involved in the spread of an infection. So for the indirect contact transmission, fomites are somewhat responsible. Contaminated syringes are served as fomites in transmitting AIDS and hepatitis. So this is the figure 14.6, the different types of contact transmission. So direct contact transmission, indirect, and droplet transmission. So we are done with the contact transmission. So we go next to vehicle transmission. So as we say vehicle transmission, the transmission of disease agents by a medium such as air, water, and food. So let's start with airborne transmission. So it refers to the spread of agents of infection by droplet nuclei in the dust, which travels more than 1 meter from the reservoir to the host. Next is waterborne. Pathogens are usually spread by water contaminated with untreated or poorly treated sewage. Next is foodborne transmission, which is pathogens are generally transmitted in foods that are completely cooked, poorly refrigerated, or prepared under unsanitary conditions. So for 14.7 shows different types of vehicle transmission. So both waterborne and foodborne transmission also provide a transfer of microbes by fecal-oral transmission. Next would be arthropods. So arthropods are the most important group of disease vectors, which is vectors or animals that carry pathogens from one host to another. So arthropods they do transmit disease by two general methods, mechanical and biological transmission. So by mechanical, is a passive transport of the pathogens on the insect's feet or other body parts as shown in figure 14.8. So if the insect makes contact with the host food, pathogens can be transferred to the food and later swallowed by the host. So houseflies, for instance, can transfer the pathogens of a typhoid fever or other certain type of diseases from the feces of infected people to food. Let's move on to biological transmission. So this is an active process and is more complex. And the arthropod bites an infected person or animal and ingests some of the infected blood. So this table shows the list. 14.3 shows the list of few important arthropod vectors and the disease they transmit. So for example, this is just a representative. So disease, the causative agent, arthropod vector. So for malaria, yung causative agent would be Plasmodium spp, which is a protozoan. And its arthropod vector is a mosquito, which is Anopheles. Next is dengue. The causative agent would be dengue virus or alpha virus. And the young arthropod vector is Aedes aegypti. It's still a mosquito as well. And next is Lyme disease. The causative agent is B. Burgdorferi. And yung arthropod vector would be the tick or Ixodes spp. Next would be Chagas disease. The causative agent is T. cruzi. It's a protozoan, and it is yung arthropod vector would be a kissing bug or teratoma. So I hope you'll familiarize this table for the representative arthropod vectors and disease they transmit. So moving on. So once we already know the transmission of diseases, so we should also deal with the healthcare associated infections or HAIs. So this is an infection patients acquire while receiving treatment of other conditions. It's a healthcare facility such as nursing home, hospital, surgery center, and so on and so forth. So table 14.4 shows that the microorganisms involved in the healthcare associated infections. So here, natay Candida sp. So it's a common cause of the urinary tract infections. Enterococcus spp, most common infections in bloodstream. wherein a percentage of total infection is 14%, while the percentage of resistant to antibiotics is 83%, which is so high. Staphylococcus aureus, the most common type of infection is surgical wound, and the percentage of infection is 16%, and the resistant to antibiotics is 55%, which is also high. Here, figure 14.19 illustrates the presence of any of those factors alone that is generally not enough to cause infection. So it is the interaction of all three factors that possesses a significant risk of HAI. So here, number one, there are several factors, microorganism in the hospital environment, a compromised status of the host. So there are two principal conditions which can compromise the host: broken skin or mucous membranes, and a suppressed immune system and the chain of transmission in the hospital. Next is there's a principal routes of transmission of HAIs, which is direct contact transmission from hospital staff to patient, from patient. And next is indirect contact transmission through fomites and hospital ventilation systems. We need to have a control of HAI infections. So the precautions are designed to protect patients, residents, staffs, and visitors from contact with pathogens. So the various precautions can be grouped into two general categories, which is standard precautions and transmission-based precautions. So for standard precautions, it's a basic minimum practices designed to prevent transmission of pathogens from one person to another and are applied to every person every time. Next is transmission-based precaution. It's designed to supplement standard precautions in individuals with known or suspected infections that are highly transmissible or epidemiologically important pathogens. So by this, there are three categories for transmission-based precautions, which is contact, droplet, and airborne precautions. So contact precautions are used for patients that have infection that can be spread by contact with patient's feces, urine, or other body fluids, skin, vomit, or wounds, or by equipment of environmental surfaces contaminated by the patient. So it could be Salmonella, Shigella, and there are example pathogens that require contact precautions. Next is droplet. So droplet precaution is used for patients that have infection that can be spread through close contact with droplet nuclei from respiratory secretions that spread only short distances. So this would be an example would be influenza, pneumonia, common cold, whooping cough, and meningitis. Next is airborne precaution. So this is used for patients that have infection that can spread by droplet nuclei over long distances, such as chickenpox, tuberculosis, and measles. And lastly, epidemiology. So this is the science that studies when and where diseases occur and how they are transmitted in populations. So there are three: descriptive epidemiology, analytical epidemiology, experimental epidemiology. Wherein descriptive epidemiology is, by definition, collecting all data that describes the occurrence of the disease under study. Next is analytical. By definition, it analyzes a particular disease to determine its probable cause. And next is experimental epidemiology. It begins with a hypothesis about a particular disease and experiments to test hypotheses, and then they're conducted. So that's all for this chapter 14, right? I'll be adding another recorded lecture, which is microbial mechanism of pathogenicity. So I hope you'll not forget our quiz on this Saturday. I forgot the date. This Saturday, katong first 5 na report, so that we cannot include that sa exam po from a lesson in your study. So thank you so much for listening and have a great day, and I'll add another recorded lecture later. Thank you so much.